Why is the BBC Symphony Orchestra Professional Edition by Spitfire Audio my personal favorite orchestral collection? I will show you why and how I use this amazing orchestra for composing music. But first, let me demonstrate a short track I wrote using all the instruments from the BBCSO Professional Edition. Now pause this video and grab a cup of coffee or tea and then join me as I break down this composition and my creative vision and process and why and how I use the BBCSO Professional Edition for this particular composition. So first, full disclaimer, I have used the BBCSO Core, which I bought in like 3 years ago. And then I asked the Spitfire Audio team if they could send me the professional upgrade in order for me to try it out, and I ended up really loving it. The BBCSO Core was already my go-to orchestral collection. But just as a disclaimer, another disclaimer is that what you heard in the beginning is the entire composition with my mastering chain on. However, I didn't mix it completely. As you can see, it's all zero here on all the tracks. It's just the mastering chain, and it's a very light mastering chain. I ended up with something like -14 LUFS integrated, which is a very dynamic, open sound, especially compared to most modern music. So let's start with this track here. I start always practically always by sketching the composition with a piano. And since I got the BBC Symphony Orchestra Piano Professional, which is an extension to the orchestral collection, I ended up using it in the actual composition because it blends beautifully with the orchestra. But it started with this piano, so let's take a listen and see if we can, well, you can check it out like this. Do it like that. Whoops. So just solo that. Now, when I press this button, I will activate the entire mastering chain as this is playing, so it will be louder, but it will still sound beautiful. 3, 2, 1. And back again. So the slight little hiss you heard there is actually because when I activate the mastering chain, the noise from my microphone is amped up, so it wasn't not at all in the library. So what I did was I created this beautiful harmonic chord progression with a kind of melody on the BBCSO Piano Professional, and I used a mix too. So what you get in the core version is only this one here, the mix one. Where are we? Here. Okay. The mix 2 is a bit closer, but then I added the ambient mics. Super cool depth there. Right? And once I got that down, I took the chord progression, the harmonic progression, and I actually started with the strings. I very often start with the strings, and to be honest, this is by far my favorite section in the BBCSO Professional Edition or core version. It has been my go-to string section for years now, even with the core version. But with the Professional Edition, just check this out. What you get is the extra mixes, microphones here that you can mix between. And I thought this would be like a gimmick or something, cool to have. But to be honest, and this is 100% truth, this has been my favorite addition from the core to the Professional Edition, because I ended up using basically the microphone positions and these sliders with the mix of the microphone signals as basically the mixing. Instead of mixing in the mixer in my DAW, you can place them in the stereo stage front to back and, get that depth by mixing with the microphone. But what you also get compared to the core version is the solo, the leaders, you call them. Like this one, this is the cello leader. Cello. Well, that's basically just the primary cellist. So if you listen to the cellos here, okay, then the cello, this is the solo. Of course, it's softer volume because it's only one player, but when you add it on top of each other, it adds a bit of definition. And also a more expression, because a solo instrument is always more expressive. And as you can hear, the BBCSO, it's a beautiful room. It's not that big Windhurst or whatever. It's not a big hall. I love this kind of scoring stage type of room. My second favorite string library, I go back and forth between them, but it's the Cinematic Studio strings, because it's also have that, that scoring stage sound. So if you take a listen to this now, let's see if I have them here, like so. This is the string section. With I use the cello leader and the first violins leader to add some more expression and definition, but this is how it sounds. Oh man, I am so in love with this sound. I don't care what other people say. Some people, you have your favorites. This is my favorite strings. But another thing I want to mention is that I didn't add any reverb. You can see you have this internal reverb. This is dynamic. No, wait a minute. Which is dynamic? There's the dynamic slider for the CC. You can use the expression to add more dynamics, and you can add reverb here. I rarely add reverb unless I do like, ambient music or stuff like that. But what I found actually after trying more of these mixes was that whenever I wanted to have more back in the room, instead of adding a reverb, I didn't use any extra reverb. What I did instead was, when I needed to, added another, like one of the background microphones, like the ambient or the tree mic, to push it back into the room. However, for the strings, I wanted this close-up, more close-up sound. As you heard, it's not It's not a super big room. I believe the scoring stage is the perfect perfect room size and acoustic, to be honest. My favorite, at least. It works super well for film music, game music, If you want to add some extra depth and reverb, you can do so. Of course, it doesn't work as good if you want those up tempo pop music strings and stuff like that. There are other libraries for that. Or you could use the closed mics, I guess. I haven't tried that. But that was the string section. Let's move on. All right, so here we have the brass section, and let's check out what you get. So with the professional edition, I don't remember exactly, but you get the contrabass tuba, I believe, the contrabass trombone, so these lower ones. The cimbasso, I'm not sure if it was any more of them there, but those are extra instruments that you don't get with the core version. And for the strings, those were all the solo strings, so the leaders. And the solo strings are by far my favorite addition for instruments with the professional edition. But I actually ended up using these super low, these low instruments as well. Let's see, where are you? Contrabass tuba. Add that with contrabass trombone, which has most of the brassy sound, and then the bass trombone. And another lovely thing about this is also in the core version, but they have, at least for some instruments, the more important instruments, I guess, versions with solo and with more players. So for the horns, you have A4, which means 4 players, and a solo patch. And the same for the trombones and the trumpets, like the most important ones there. Then not for the lower ones here, the tubas, but you have a contrabass tuba and a tubas. You could say you can use those as 2 players. And the bass trombone and contrabass trombone, here you have A2 and a solo, so you can use that solo compared to that as well. Not exactly the same, but you get the point. So for the brass, I usually like to keep it simple, and especially for this composition, I wanted to make it more regal, majestic. So without the trumpet to sound like this, let me just add the mastering chain when I play. So, I need to remember this button. So, as you heard, very powerful low dynamics and low, the power you hear there. But what many people are complaining about in some forums, and I tend to agree, is that some of these brass instruments lack in the double and triple fortissimo layers. Those that when you hear the brass instruments are angry and like shouting. That power. So that's like one of the minor drawbacks. I guess the entire BBC Symphony Orchestra is not really meant for those epic styles of music. So if you're used to composing epic music, you may need to layer with other brass libraries, such as, more hybrid and produced hyped, especially for the brass. Now, I also used trumpet here, and I used a solo trumpet. And the reason is because I need a leading melody. So I chose the trumpet, and I layered it with some of the woodwinds, but this is how the trumpet sounds. Okay, so together now with the brass section, full brass section here, including the trumpet, you hear it comes through, and in most cases you only need a solo trumpet because it carries so far. And I used lower dynamics. I even ended up, let me see, I turned down this mix 1 and added some 3 microphone here because I wanted to push it back a bit. Again, as I said, mixing with the microphones, it's probably gonna be my new favorite thing, and I'm going to start trying to use it with some of my other sample libraries that has the multiple microphone signals included in the sample library. So with the trumpet, it sounds like this with the mastering chain. Without. Still with a low end power, but of course a mastering chain will bring up everything a bit. And so that is the brass section. As I said, you get some of these lower brass in Baggström. I know that. I think contrabass trombone and contrabass tuba also as additions on top of the microphone signals, which some people were like have complained like, why would you need? You can always use a reverb and add it to push it back in the mix. You can. It's messing a lot more, and actually I found this super much easier because you blend it much better with the real room recordings with the microphones than with the reverb. Much faster process, and you don't even need to use those pesky send effects and inserts and whatnot. So let's move on to the Woodwinds now. All right, so let's take a quick listen to the Woodwinds while you look at the beautiful piano roll editor that we all love so much. I will activate the mastering chain. It will not do as much on the Woodwinds. I wanted to keep them very low, like a soft whisper lush of colors. That's what Woodwinds are great for. So let's have a listen. 3, 2, 1. As you heard there, the mastering chain doesn't do as much on the Woodwinds because they are so low, so they are not as affected with the compression and the processing. Beautiful sound. I actually really love the Woodwinds. Probably my second favorite in the BBC Symphony Orchestra. So the strings are my go-to, and the winds are beautiful. So I think it's the same as the brass. If I remember correctly, you get these extra low instruments, the contrabassoon, the contrabass clarinet. I'm not sure about the bass clarinet, but I think the cor anglia, or English horn, as it's known by as well, I think it might be an addition here. You can, of course, go to the website. I will leave a link to the Spitfire page here so you can check it out. But you get basically more of these extra low-end instruments for the brass and woodwinds, and the string leaders, or the solo for the strings. So let me see what I did here. I used basically mix 1 here. I don't remember if I did as much. Here I used the solo flute, so you can. And I used the mix 2 to get a more close sound. Let's see if you can listen to this. Whoops. So let me just bring this up. This is the ordinary mix 1, which you get in the core edition. Let's see. Sounds beautiful. It's the same setup for the microphone signals in all the sections, which is great because you get to know the microphone mixes or the signals, the depth, how it sounds. So mix 2 is a bit more definition, I feel like. And well, in this case I wanted to use that. And you have so just let me just show you. Let's do it like this. So you can use for the flutes, the A3, so 3 players playing in unison, and it of course sounds fatter, not as defined as a solo instrument. Because as all ensembles or section, they blend together and create a bit of a blur of colors, whereas the solo, especially apparent, and this is something, a little tip for you. If you want the vibrato, I never learned that, vibrato, to really be heard and felt in the mix, use a solo instrument. Because when you use vibrato, it's always tiny fluctuations. It's every player that does his or her speed and depth of the vibrato and curve. And when they all blend together, it creates a beautiful, expressive vibrato, but not a defined, that was my voice doing a vibrato. So I tend to love using solo instruments for those leading melodies. I did it with the trumpet as well. So a bit of a tip for you there. And sections or ensembles for more of the backing parts of the harmonic voices and stuff like that. So here I use the horns, the flute solo, I use the solo on oboe and the trumpets. Okay, so that is the Woodwinds. Let's go on with the final. No, we have actually 2 sections. Well, the percussion, but I have actually divided it into the untuned percussion, like non-pitched, basically drums and cymbals and stuff, and what I call tuned percussion. You can call it melodic percussion, where you have the timpani and the mallets and stuff. So let's start with the untuned percussion. Now, for this particular composition, my vision was to have those majestic, expressive, emotional strings and brass and the colors of the woodwinds carry the entire, like a wave of sounds. So I wanted to keep the percussion purposefully way in the background, low in the mix. And the BBCSO Pro is perfect for this because you can use those microphone signals, as well as it's generally more classic in the sound and tone. So again, this library or collection is not really meant for epic, so you won't find those damaged drums, those hybrid, super processed sounds, but rather a more natural, classical style of percussion. And I don't want to use too much, so I only use some of the, accents and stuff. So the bass drum, here, a snare, some rolls on the cymbals, and a bit of a tambourine that I pushed way into the back by only using the outriggers and ambient mics. I mean, so let's start by listening to it, how it sounds. Mastering chain on. This is the BBCSO Pro Percussion, the standard drums and unpitched percussion. Okay, so, oops, let's stop there. It's so hard to do it all. Mute the solo, mute the microphone, use this latency. I need to find a better process for that later. But anyway, as you heard, very sparse, minimal percussion, lots of air in between, and kind of low in the mix. I mean, you hear the accent. You just want to augment a bit of the energy into the music, but not have it too much. So for the bass drum, here I used bass drum 1. You get 2 bass drums. I don't believe you get any extra unpitched percussion in this professional edition, but you get these. Mix 2 and close, because I wanted more defined sound than this. Okay, so I need to actually solo the bass drum. Like this. Right? And instead, I use this mix 2, which is a bit more defined, added some close mics. Where are the hits? right? And I for the percussion, it's extremely important. It's basically one of the most important sections for spacing, meaning reverb in the room here, and that's where the microphone signals mean the most. So, I mean, they mean a lot on all of these instruments, as I have figured out from trying it out. But for percussion, I would say the space and the room they are recorded in and the microphone positions mean more than any other section of the orchestra. So here I used, let's see, only the 3 mics. And as you can see, I didn't even put it on 100%. So I mix with these faders, the microphone faders. So this is, I mean, this is the snare. Like so. You don't need to hear every single here. So I just used a roll here and some drive in the accents. And for the cymbals as well, starting with the roll. Light accents. So these are not really accented cymbal crashes. They can go much louder, but I don't want it for this mix. So those are the percussion instruments. You can see I actually added, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I added every single instrument from the professional edition, but I haven't used everything. I just wanted to show you what's in there. So you have the bass drum, snare, military drum, which is basically, well, what is it? It's like a snare drum type. Tenor drum, which is, I think, like basically a bigger snare drum without the snares. Piatti, which is the cymbals you crash together like this. Cymbals are, crash cymbals. Tam-tam, which is basically a gong. Tambourine, of course, you know what that is. Triangle toys are like the, what is it? Yeah, you know those. Like you hear in all the old cartoons as effects in the orchestra. That, some of them can absolutely be used. Anvil is, an anvil, like a blacksmith uses, and it's... I always thought it was funny how a big anvil sounds so light. And I wanted more clonk in the metal, but that's an anvil. So let's move on to the tune percussion now. So let's check out what you get in the tune percussion section. So you have a timpani, which is one of my personal favorite timpanis of all time. Super dynamic to play and fun. Then you get a harp, and I know some controversy. Some people don't like that you put it in the percussion section, rather the string section, but yeah, it's here in the tuned percussion section at least. And it sounds beautiful. I use it basically as short arpeggios, just this beautiful shimmery sound. And I also, get some of the mallets, so marimba, cellist, xylophone, vibraphone, and crotales. And also a glockenspiel, which I actually ended up using. And I wanted to push it really back in the mix, so I used mainly the ambient mics here and some 70% of the mix one, but I wanted this background, magical, high, shimmery sound. I also use tubular bells for the main accents every fourth, well, not really, but every time we get an A minor chord, basically. I don't know why. It's an A, and then finish with a C, I think. So they can sound like this. Again, like with the unpitched percussion, the tune percussion also, you really get to use this. So I use the 3 mics here, some of mics mix 1. But a minor drawback could be here that when I listen to, let's see, for example, I think it was the cellist, and when I had it on the mix 1, let's see. Where are you, cellist? Where are you? Oh, I need to lower the mic. Well, some of these I felt was not as balanced as the other sections, so they stuck out a bit more, like they were simply put too loud in comparison to what they should have been. So, but it was easily solved by, unloading this and using some of the outriggers and the ambient mics, and now I get, Perfect. Instead of having to go into the mixer all the time, I basically never opened the mixer when I composed this track. How awesome is that for productivity and workflow? I just used the instruments itself. You have the dynamics. You also have this one, the cellist. So this was on the top. You can use this as like a volume fader in the instrument, and then the microphones to blend it into the room wherever you want it to be. So the tune percussion I really didn't use as much. Let me listen to how it sounds. Just the harp, glockenspiel, and tubular bells, like this. Let's do a quick. Sounds so beautiful and light. So that was part of my creative vision here. I wanted to keep the percussion, especially tune percussion, light and magical, but also the main percussion to be, well, basically in the back, just adding some flair. So this is how the entire percussion section sounds like together. Without the mastering chain, with so what mainly comes through when you do like the mastering chain is, of course, you beef up the low end and the highest shimmery frequency. So you hear the bass drum come through a lot more when I activate the mastering chain. But that was the BBC Pro SO Pro percussion section, the percussion unpitched, and the tune. So if I go into the actual plugin, I also want to mention that I love this plugin. I think Contact should take note. You have the this one. This is by far my favorite thing. Whoops, what I'm doing. You can resize the plugin. You cannot steal in Contact and some other sample engines. And this one, that you have an instrument, you can just simply click here and everything is here. So you can go to, let's say, the brass section and find something there. And I know there's a lot of advanced features. I want to keep it simple and beautiful. Some people prefer the Contact. I hate the Contact engine with the library here. You go back and forth and it loses, the instrument you are using when you go back and you need to go use the library browser again. It's a mess. So having it all in here, including if you add the piano extension, it's also here. So if you have the entire orchestra in here, that is so great. And they also have this memory server here. So everything loads up here. So when you add the microphone, if I add something here, let's say this, close mics, like so, it will load in. Let me see. Have I already used this? It should start. I thought it would start to add there, but basically, when you add instruments, it starts to load into the memory server. And if you use, as far as I understood it, if I use the let's say the basses here in the strings section, and I want to add another folder up here with another, like the driving ostinato, and use the basses there, I can add the basses, and from my understanding, someone could correct me, or Spitfire, the team, they should share the same sample pool in the memory, so it doesn't add any more RAM usage, since you already loaded that instrument here. So if I load it again up here and add like an ostinato with the same, as far as I understand, when it's the same instrument, it doesn't add to the RAM. Another cool thing is that you can go back and forth from the Pro to the core version. I started using Pro on everything because I love those microphone signals to blend, shape the room and positioning. But if you want to save some RAM, you can go back to the core version for some of these plugins or instruments if you want to. All right, so that was the BBC Symphony Orchestra Professional Edition why I love it so much, and how I use all those cool features, including some of my minor feedback and minor drawbacks that I would like to have updated or added in the future. But I also want to hear from you guys now. What do you think about this great collection of orchestral instruments, basically an entire orchestra in one collection? And what would you like to have added or changed for a future update? I will leave links in the description, and I will see you in the next video, my friends.